The scenario begins with Jo March taking a deep breath anxiously before entering an office full of mails. She approaches the guy behind the desk and takes out a narrative written by a friend. Mr. Dashwood is his name. Joy floods her eyes as she informs him about all of the story's triumphs. He glances over and urges her to have a seat. He pulls out a quill and starts to read. Jo gives him a concerned gaze as she waits for him to finish. He periodically chuckles as he reads and continues to mark off passages that irritate him. Jo is certain that the narrative will be rejected as her optimism fades. He agrees to publish her tale, much to her astonishment. He is aware that there is no Buddy, but Jo is the true author of the narrative. She prefers to stay anonymous as an author. Nothing can stop Jo from running through the throng. Her enthusiasm overwhelms her senses as she sees her goal of being a writer becoming a reality. She returns to her boarding house residence. Jo returns and begins writing in her journal. Friedrich approaches her and welcomes her, but she is preoccupied with something else. When he looks down, he finds that her clothing are on fire. He says she's on fire, but she interprets that as a praise rather than a warning. This time he screams, which catches her attention. Others come to her rescue. The charred end of her coat is the extent of the damage. She is reminded that her pupils must be waiting for her, so she departs. Friedrich follows her, staring at her dreamily, wondering whether she'll ever stop working and spend some time with him. But Jo won't be able to until Amy, her sister in Paris, marries someone rich enough to support her family. Until then, she is the only bearer of this load. Amy is painting portraits of individuals in Paris who are patiently waiting for her to complete. She realizes she has ruined the picture but continues as if nothing has occurred. Amy goes with Aunt March, who tells her unfunny jokes but pretends to laugh in order to keep her aunt's heart. She is distraught when she reads a letter from her mother. Aunt observes this and inquires. She wishes she could go back in time and cure her family's troubles, but Aunt March tells her that if she does, she would be powerless to do so. The only thing she can do for them is get married to Fred Vaughn. Amy came here not just to be engaged, but also to take painting classes. Aunt forgets this because she does not value learning as much as she values engagement. As their carriage moves, Amy sees Theodore Laurie stroll by her. Her mouth is wide open as she struggles to trust her own eyes. She yells for the carriage to come to a stop, and they do. Aunt March attempts to stop her, but she is deafeningly deaf. She leaps out of excitement to see a familiar face. Amy yells his name till he turns around and sees her. He embraces her as she rushes into his arms. They haven't seen each other in a long time, and Laurie laughs about not recognizing her since she has grown so much. He's been traveling alone, away from his granddad. Amy inquires as to if he has fallen in love with someone else. His grin fades rapidly. Amy realizes she has touched on a sensitive issue and hastily apologizes. He was in love with Jo, but she rejected him. He hasn't moved on yet, but he smiles for Amy's sake and assures her that he is well. Amy returns to her aunt when her aunt instructs her to do so. Laurie circles behind her and kisses Aunt March on the cheek. She smacks him playfully and begs the coachman to move. As the carriage proceeds, Amy quickly asks Laurie to a gala where everyone, including her fiancé Fred, will be there. He pledges to arrive on time to take her up. As she turns back and sees Laurie going away, her face is decorated with a gorgeous grin, whilst Aunt March gives her a disappointed expression. Meg March stares wistfully at a cloth she wants to purchase. Her buddy Sally notices this and persuades her to purchase it. Despite the fact that they are struggling financially and she has other obligations, she caves and purchases it. She later regrets her choice when she returns home. Her son and daughter, who are playing nearby, walk up to embrace their mother, but her guilt still grips her. Beth March contemplates while playing the piano. Someone continually yells her name after she finishes. Jo is seeing a performance at a theater. Friedrich is in the crowd, but he keeps turning back to get a sight of Jo, who is completely ignorant of what is going on. Her whole focus is on play. Everyone departs once it is over, and Jo sees Friedrich. She chases him and eventually ends up at a party. A guy who cannot communicate in English leads her to the dance floor, where everyone dances and rejoices. Friedrich clutches her hand and they dance together midway through. Jo can't help but recall the time she spent with her sisters 7 years ago. They are preparing to attend a dance. Jo wants to dance but has no idea with whom. They're all helping each other get ready, but Jo refuses to cooperate. She'd rather be comfortable than attractive. Beth wishes she could attend but is forbidden, and she is envious of her sisters. Jo cares after Meg's hair, but in an unfortunate turn of circumstances, she burns it off. As she learns what has transpired, she cries in fear. They're at the party, and Meg gives Jo advice on what she should and shouldn't do during the dance. Meg's buddy pulls her away during their talk. Jo is powerless as her sister walks away. She stands in the corner, bored, while she observes others joyfully dancing. Meg is one of them. Jo begs her to go, but it's much too early, and Meg isn't ready to go yet. Just then, Joe catches a man looking at her from a distance. He attempts to approach her, and when she notices this, she creeps around and hides from him. She goes back into the room and runs into Lori by mistake. This is their first encounter, and he is taken aback by her. She begins to apologize, but he cuts her off, claiming there's nothing to apologize for. They make an introduction. Lori looks at her, knowing he has just seen the most gorgeous female he has ever seen. As he sits alone in a room, Joe asks whether he enjoys dancing. He has spent the most of his time in Europe and is new to this country. Joe shrieks with delight when she learns this, but quickly regains her control when she recalls her sister's counsel. She shows him her sister through the curtain, but he doesn't appear to notice since he is still smitten with Joe. The more she speaks, the more he is drawn to her. Her points of view seem to be similar to his, so he invites her to dance. She tells him she can't, but she has a good reason. She set fire to her outfit, and Meg warned her not to dance because everyone would notice. Lori suggests a solution to her difficulty, and the two of them dance outdoors, away from onlookers. Some of their movements are fantastic, but the majority of the time they behave silly and dance carelessly. Outside lacks the warmth of the indoors, yet Lori remains warm as long as he is with Joe. Meg notices Joe through the window and informs her that she has hurt her ankle. They don't have the funds for a carriage, and she can't remain any longer. Lori offers to assist since he lives next door. In all honesty, he does not want to remain any longer if they are not present. Everything is in disarray as their mother welcomes them in. The home is full with ladies. Lori pauses uncomfortably at the doorway, and their mother invites him in. Amy glances up and is instantly captivated by him. His attention, on the other hand, is fixed on Joe. He is astounded by the family and the warmth they exude. Lori is about to leave when she notices Joe standing by her window, penning her tales. He can't stop smiling. Joe is continuing writing in the present. A knock on a door pulls Joe from her line of thinking, and she goes to answer it. 3 books have been left for her as a present. She takes it up and reads the message that came with it. It comes from Frederick. He hopes to one day read her works if she regards him as a sincere and loyal friend. Amy is dancing with her fiancé, Fred, at the gala, to which she has brought Lori. She waited for Lori for an hour, but he never arrived. As he enters the hall, Lori is severely inebriated and surrounded by females. Amy recognizes him and is disappointed. She approaches him to complain, but he is too inebriated to comprehend her. He chases her as she walks away, enraged. Her rage is bubbling over, and she unleashes it on him. He is attractive, but he has a large ego, is lethargic, and has every terrible behavior imaginable. He takes her arm in the midst of her speech, only to confront her rage and be humiliated by her. When she informs him that the ring on his finger is silly, he loses his spark. It's the ring Joe gave him. He's still not over her and is devastated any time he has the opportunity. Amy can't help but sympathize with him. He's unhappy, and she knows it. If he isn't loved, he should be respected, which he isn't. Lori makes a scene before leaving by screaming out to Fred. Everyone turns to stare at her, and she apologizes, her voice tinged with pain. Joe shows Frederick her tales and nervously awaits his response. Her tales are a touch out of the ordinary. She writes about conflicts, something that society does not expect women to write about. Her mother had strongly barred her from writing her name since a girl's name on such writings would not make a good impression. Frederick takes his time making an opinion, while Joe paces nervously. She is anticipating his reaction but is disappointed when he replies plainly. He is open about his dislike for her work. Joe can't believe it since she's always been complimented. Her work has even been published, so she is perplexed by such severe criticism. She refuses to be forgotten, whereas Frederick always gives her the truth in her best interests. Having her work criticized is something she seldom experiences, so when it happens on this occasion, she feels upset and betrayed by her closest friend. She instructs him not to speak to her again and rushes away, leaving him to ponder what he did wrong. Joe instantly departs after receiving a letter. We are transported back in time once again. Joe awakens from her profound nap to find that it is Christmas. She comes down yelling Merry Christmas, and her whole family greets her in the lounge. They don't have any gifts since they can't afford to purchase any. They all have different goals in life. Amy aspires to be a painter in Paris, while Joe aspires to be a writer. Beth is a musician who wishes to remain anonymous. She just wants to play it for her family and no one else. Meg attempts to teach them about the sacrifices their men make in battle, and how they, as women, should also do their part perfectly. But just then, a pillow crashes on her face. Joe warns her not to behave like their mother, but Amy instantly defends Meg. A friendly fight breaks out between them, while their housekeeper, Hannah, attempts to defuse the situation with words since she is too elderly to be on the battlefield. Sisters approach her and give her warm hugs. They're all in a play that Joe created herself. She gives each of them their parts as they prepare for their performances. Amy appears in her outfit, which she made herself. Jo wants Hannah to be in her play as well, but Hannah declines before she even asks. On her way back home, their mother sobs and wipes her eyes before entering. She smiles as she watches her children practicing their games and wishes them a Merry Christmas. They all rush towards their mother as soon as they see her. She envelopes them all in her loving arms. They all sit at the table, looking enthusiastically at the meal. They're starving since it's been so long since they've had a proper dinner. They see their mother isn't pleased and ask her what's wrong. She expresses her sadness at the notion of a lady who lives nearby. Their mother is a nice lady, but she occasionally puts the pleasure of others ahead of the happiness of her own children. She begrudgingly requests that they give her their meal. They've been anticipating it for a long time and seldom get to enjoy such a treat, but when their mother asks, they have no option but to comply. Laurie grins as he watches the girls depart from his window. They're on their way to assist the ladies their mother mentioned. As they enter the house, they witness children sobbing and their mother thanking God for the assistance she has received. Sisters interact with children by sharing their belongings with them. Laurie's grandpa sees them giving away their food and gives them a gift. When they return, they are surprised by the quantity of food on their table. Girls assumed he was a cruel old dad who abandoned his kid to marry someone else, but this was not the case. He was merely a poor old guy who had lost both his daughter and his son. Meg has a crush on Laurie and only speaks about how charming he is. They race towards their mother as she surprises them with a letter from their father. Their mother reads the letter and expresses how much their father misses them. He hopes that while he is gone, they will blossom into the ladies they want to be. They realize their future ambitions and become prosperous. That is everything he wants for them and all he prays for. The whole neighborhood's youngsters have assembled to witness the performance. Everyone applauds and shouts when they finish. The train conductor is now waking Jo awake. She has arrived at her destination, and everyone has already departed. Friedrich returns home and wonders why she left so abruptly. Because she didn't explain, the housekeeper doesn't know much. It's a shame not just for Friedrich, but also for her pupils, since she was their finest instructor. Jo wanders dejectedly in the snow, holding her baggage. It's the polar opposite of when she used to travel to town with her sisters. She heads to her aunt's house for some tutoring. On the way, the girls are concerned about the current financial crisis. Meg, the eldest sister, offers some words of consolation, which the group cheerfully dismisses. Aunt March chastises her for failing to read the book she instructed her to read. Jo is thankful for all Mom has done for her, but she only wants to succeed through her own hard work. She doesn't want to ask for favors, but Aunt March tells her straight that the world doesn't operate that way, particularly for women. Making their own name is not only difficult, but also impossible. Aunt advises her she must marry someone wealthy or she would spend the rest of her life in a terrible pit. They disagree on marriage, since Jo believes that marrying a wealthy guy isn't the only way a woman may become wealthy. Aunt disagrees, citing the example of her own mother and father, who live in difficult circumstances but are constantly striving to make the lives of others happy. Jo believes that is the prudent choice, but wisdom isn't always correct. When Aunt March adds that she'll be returning to Europe and will require a companion, the mood lightens. It's a generous offer that Jo readily accepts. Amy goes to school and discusses the conflict with her classmates. They dare her to sketch their professor, which she does, but is quickly discovered. Mr. Brooks, Laurie's instructor, refuses to teach him Latin, and he stands like a statue on the chair. The teacher urges him to come down, but he refuses. He is warning him that if he does not learn, he will be returned. But Laurie is thinking about something else. He informs Brooks that there is a female outside. At first, he doesn't believe him. Laurie gets out a stool and encourages Brooks to stand on it. He does, and then pauses as he notices a female pacing outside. Amy here. They are both looking out the window. Laurie inquires as to her purpose for being there, and Amy sobs as she extends her hand. Her feet are lovely, but her hand is wounded from being smacked by the instructor. He takes her in, and when word gets back home, Jo and Meg show up to take Amy home. They are at the library, and Jo is captivated by its beauty. Meg rushes over to Amy to treat to her wounds. Laurie simply glances at Jo as she looks about the library, wishing it was hers. She compares Laurie's grandpa's image to her grandfather's and believes that her grandfather is more attractive. As she says, she is unaware that Mr. Lawrence is standing just behind her. She attempts to apologize when she does, but he merely laughs. He knew her grandpa and is certain he recalls her. Jo's eyes brighten up as she hears this. Their mother approaches Laurie and apologizes on their behalf, but he dismisses it. He assures her that they may be naughty, but not more so than he is. The girls like Laurie's home so much that they want to return. Laurie invites them to return anytime they want. Amy may gaze at the artworks while Beth plays the piano and Jo borrows books. Brooks offers to show them the greenhouse, but he is met with silence since none of them know what to say. They depart in complete disarray. Brooks is holding Meg's glove, which she has forgotten about. When they go, their home becomes quiet. They have an activity in the attic where they pretend to be males. It's wonderfully lighted, and everyone performs their parts flawlessly. Joe advises that they also include Laurie. No one agrees at first since he is a genuine kid, but after recalling how he has been with them, they all reluctantly raise their hands to vote in his favor. Laurie leaps from the mound of garments as soon as the vote results are revealed. He's been lurking there since the beginning of the game, and Joe has been compelled to invite him into their secret club. The girls chuckle as he pretends to be an elderly gentleman. He hands them the keys and takes his seat as an official member. This key is now in the possession of Joe, who is presently in the present. She has kept it secure ever since. Joe has arrived at her house and discreetly slips in, startling her family. Her mother, Meg, and Hannah all rush up to her and wrap their arms around her. Beth, it turns out, has an illness that weakens her every day. Joe has gathered all of her cash for her treatment and would want to take her to the sea. She inquires if they have told Amy, but is unhappy when her mother informs her that it is still a secret since they do not want to spoil her vacation. Joe is enraged with Amy for constantly avoiding responsibilities when the going gets tough. It transports her back in time. Meg and Joe are getting ready since Joe has invited them. Amy whines because she, too, wants to go on this vacation, but Joe urges her not to be a baby. She is not invited, and the talk is over. They abandon her, and she rushes away in rage. Brooks has arrived and is sitting behind Meg. He grins as he takes a few looks at Meg. Amy is simmering with rage as she enters Joe's room and removes her manuscripts. She burns them in retaliation for not allowing her to accompany them. They all depart after the play is over. Brooks extends his arm to Meg, who accepts it. Laurie attempts the same thing but is struck on the arm as she flees. Instead, he walks side by side with Meg. They get home smiling and joking. Amy sits in quiet, waiting for Joe to discover what has occurred. Joe rushes to her room, as planned, to jot down the idea she had after the performance, but is disappointed when she can't locate it. Meg is telling Beth about Brooke's lovely eyes when Joe interrupts and asks whether anybody has seen her manuscript. Amy scrolls over the pages, oblivious to her surroundings. Joe is certain she is the perpetrator based on her demeanor and takes her by the hair. They battle for control, and their mother arrives to separate them. Amy admits furiously that she did not conceal the book, but rather burned it. Later, Amy attempts to apologize and begs Joe to forgive her, but Joe declares that she will be furious at her forever and exits the room. They are all quiet at the breakfast table the next morning. Joe is unkempt, while Beth is playing with her toys. Amy walks down and sits next to Joe, but Joe isn't ready to be that near to her. She rises up and sits as far away from her as she can. Laurie arrives just in time to take her to the water. She doesn't waste any time in departing, all the while Amy yells for them to take her with them. Amy feels bad about her behavior and hopes she could be her friend again. Meg tells her to accompany them and speak with her while she is in a good mood. Now is the moment to apologize. Amy hastily gets up, takes her belongings, and follows them. Joe and Laurie are ice skating on the river. Amy shouts out to Joe, but she does not stop. They continue on their way, leaving Amy behind. Amy falls into the river as predicted as the ice splits. Joe hurries to her sister after hearing her cries. She panics when she sees Amy struggling, but she pulls her out and hugs her in her arms, apologizing for leaving her behind. While Joe observes, Mother tucks Amy in. She hates herself for allowing her rage to consume her. She can't believe she put her sister in this situation. Her mother sits behind her and informs her that this is a quality she inherited from her mother. Joe is astonished since she has always regarded her mother as calm and collected, but what she sees is the result of 40 years of struggle. Everything becomes easier as time passes. Joe is now sitting on the floor near Beth's bed, waiting for her to wake up. Beth notices her and cries out her name. Joe gets up, embraces her ailing sister, and wishes she hadn't left them. She's reading a letter from Amy, in which she tells them about her journey. Laurie is also present, she says. Joe is upset since he never writes back to her. She wants everything might be restored to its previous state. Meg is off to the ball, and her mother gives her the jewelry she has. She kept it secure, but now she gives it to Meg since lovely things should be worn by gorgeous women. She is leaving for a week, and Brooks is concerned about her absence. Joe presents Laurie with a ring that, although awful, he finds very attractive. Mr. Lawrence praises Meg for the carriage, but he declines to take credit for it. Mr. Lawrence wonders aloud whether one of the girls might want to come over and play the piano, which lies unused in his home. Beth timidly approaches him and asks for his consent. When she performs, he gladly permits her and gives her entire solitude. Meg departs and bids her goodnight. She arrives at the home of her friend Annie. Daisy is her nickname. One of the girls gives Meg her outfit, which she accepts cautiously. They all stand on the stairs and stroll down one by one, grinning the whole while. They're conversing and joking in the main hall when Laurie walks up behind her. Meg is as astonished to see him as he is to see her being addressed as Daisy. He wonders whether Meg actually wants to speak with one of the men at the ball. She says she may and inquires about her appearance. Lori is brutally honest, telling her she isn't up to his standards, and she storms out, calling him the rudest kid she's ever encountered. Later, she sits alone on the sofa, unhappy, while everyone else dances. Lori appears and begs her forgiveness. Her outfit, not herself, is unappealing. She's simply as lovely as she usually is. Lori agrees to keep this a secret from everyone, even Joe. Beth approaches the music room with trepidation. She notices the piano and begins to play softly. Despite his pledge to provide her complete solitude, Mr. Lawrence is her only audience. He comes down and sits on the stairwell, listening to her music. His eyes well up with tears as she reminds him of her own daughter. Meg is now sitting with her husband Brooks, informing him about the cloth she purchased. She is really remorseful and regrets purchasing it, which isn't even a whole dress. Meg is unhappy when Sally buys all the gowns in front of her and bemoans the fact that she did not purchase them. Brooks is brokenhearted when his wife expresses her true feelings about their position. He can't help but believe that he is the one who has dragged her into this awful existence with him. He walks away as Meg reflects on what she has just said. Amy is painting in Paris when Lori walks in. He attempts to apologize for his previous rudeness, but she just ignores him. Amy believes she has failed since Joe is in Paris. She believes she is more successful than she is. Lori believes he gives her less credit than she deserves, but she understands that it is a man's world, and only men are permitted to succeed. He asks whether she actually loves Fred, and she responds truthfully. Her marriage to a wealthy family is a way for her to pull her family out of their wretched situation. She can't afford to love since nothing, not even her own children, will ever be hers. When Fred's carriage comes, she requests that Lori remove her apron. As he does so, he experiences feelings that he does not seem to grasp. She asks him whether she looks okay, and he responds truthfully, she looks stunning. Lori is envious as she sees Amy leaving. They are on the beach in the past. Joe and Lori run on the beach as Amy sketches. He attempts to irritate her by informing her that Brooks intends to marry her. She, as a youngster, cannot envision anybody taking her sister away and challenges anyone who tries to do so. Joe now sits with Beth and reads her what she has written, and the memory fades. Joe believes she is finished writing, but Beth encourages her. She requests that she compose one for her. Their mother works because they are struggling to aid the families of troops serving in the army. A guy approaches her, and after hearing his tale, she feels terrible for him. She quietly offers him her own scarf as a sacrifice to keep him warm in this chilly winter air. As he walks away, he thanks her. When a letter arrives for her, she rushes out the door. As she packs, their mother informs them that their father is in the hospital. Lori and Mr. Lawrence are there to assist them, and Lori promises to look after the girls while she is away. Brooks volunteers to accompany their mother, and Meg, upon hearing this, gives him a surprise kiss on the cheek. Joe provides the $25 she earned by cutting her hair to aid the mother. Later, Joe tears in arms of Amy at the remembrance of her hair. Lori lies on a cloth beside Amy as she doodles on a piece of paper. He is looking at her with a sparkle in his eyes. She notices, but says nothing. Instead, she asks him, what does he intend to do with his life? His answer isn't what Amy approves of, and Lori asks what does she wants him to be. She says nothing, but smiles at him. Amy takes out a drawing of him she drew when she met Fred back in time. He is jealous of them, and cannot even hide it. Lori straight up tells her to not marry him. He approaches her, and she knows why. He wants to be with her now, when Joe is done with him. Amy cries as she tells him she isn't willing to be a second option, especially after loving him her whole life. Brooke writes Meg letters letting them know about their father's health. Joe is jealous of him and wishes he would stop writing them. Beth has made slippers for Mr. Lawrence as a gift. When all the girls refuse, she goes alone and gives them at his house. She also performs all her mother's duties in her absence. As she is walking back, all the girls stand in the window, waiting for her anxiously. She comes in and sees them all standing in the line. They give her a note, which is from Mr. Lawrence, and move away. There lies a piano that Mr. Lawrence has brought for Beth. The slippers from Beth are the best gift one has ever given to him. Beth is filled with emotions and goes to him to thank him personally. When she sees him, words aren't enough, so she hugs him. He notices she has a fever and calls for the doctor. Upon the checkup, he finds she has scarlet fever, which at the start appeared normal. It's decided that as Amy never had this before, she'll be sent to Aunt March to keep her safe. Joe hopes Beth becomes healthy again once they take care of her. She still suffers from it. Joe reads her the story, and the gentle beach breeze blows past them. Beth thinks she'll not make it, but Joe will not let anything happen to her sister, and /sis determined to help her. She has done it in the past. That night, Joe nurses Beth, and keeps her motivated. Aunt March comes looking for Amy. She tells her she is the only one who can save her family, and the only way to do that is by marrying someone rich. Aunt March tells Amy that Laurie has just left for London. Her heart breaks as she hears the words. She had just rejected Fred. Back at home, Meg and Joe look after Beth. Brooks comes, and Meg goes to see him. She tries to apologize for not being there with him and the children, but he informs her he has taken leave to look after their children, and she should only worry about her sister. Meg is filled with happiness, and her love for her husband has increased many folds. He tells her to give that fabric to the dressmaker, but she has already sold it to Sally, her friend. Upon hearing this, he realizes he is the luckiest man alive. Joe looks at them from the window, but is taken out of her thoughts when Beth's condition worsens. This has happened the same way in the past. Their mother stayed by her side, while this time Joe lay beside her. She cries and begs her to not leave. Joe always worried much about Beth whenever she got sick. She remembers the time when she woke up and Beth wasn't there. She ran downstairs, only to find her eating breakfast. On Christmas, their father comes back and surprises them. They cannot believe their eyes and run up to him. It's a joyous occasion as everyone is happy and spends their time together. This time, when Joe wakes up, Beth isn't on the bed. She runs downstairs, only to see her mother crying. The thing she dreaded the most has happened, and after all their efforts, they couldn't save her. At her funeral, everyone leaves, but Joe stays behind. Her memory takes her back to the time when Meg is getting married. Meg's dreams differ from Joe's. It's hard for her to accept that she is leaving them. She wishes Meg can stay with them forever. She isn't ready to let go of her childhood. On their wedding days, Meg cries while taking her vows, but when it's all done, they all dance and celebrate. Aunt March tells Meg that she wished she had not married a commoner like her mother had with her father. Meg is content with her decision and knows she'll find the happiness in a cottage that some people cannot find in enormous mansions. Amy comes jumping up and down, announcing that she is going to Europe with Aunt March. Joe feels betrayed, as she had previously promised to take her. She puts up a smile and congratulates her, but their mother knows and gives her a sympathetic smile. The rich sunset makes the landscape more enchanting as Joe and Laurie walk side by side. Joe mentions how she now feels lonely, as all her sisters are off to somewhere. All of them have their future set, while Joe does not know what to do with her life. Laurie stops and looks her in the eye. He wants them to run far, far away, and tells her what she has been dreading to hear. He tells her he loves her and has been in love with her since the day they met. Everyone already thinks they'll end up together, but Joe doesn't want to. She thinks of him as his friend, and only that. Nothing more, nothing less. The entire world turns upside down when he hears this. She has tried to love him, but cannot change her feelings. She cannot decide with whom to fall in love. Laurie is angry and upset. He starts to leave, saying he'd rather take his own life than to watch the only girl / she ever loved being taken away. Joe follows him and tries to reason. She knows they differ a lot from each other. Even if they marry, she'll never truly love him, and they'll be both miserable. Joe thinks she'll never marry, as she values her freedom, but Laurie thinks otherwise. He knows she is a kind soul who cannot live without loving. One day she'll fall in love with someone and will give her all to that person. She'll be happy, and he'll watch from afar. He walks off, leaving Joe alone, saddened at the loss of a good friend. Joe is packing Beth's things when her mother comes up. She thinks Joe is way too lonely here and should go back to New York to her friend Friedrich / but she can't. Last time they talked, they had a great fight, and Joe thinks he wouldn't want to see her ever again. Laurie is coming back along with Joe. Upon hearing this, she wonders if Laurie still loves her. Being alone for so long has made her so fragile that she wants to be loved and cared for. Joe hates the idea of women only being seen as ornaments, but cannot help wanting care. She doesn't love Laurie, but wants to be loved. Amy stands firm, waiting for a ride. Laurie walks up to her from behind. She looks at him and cannot help but cry. He takes her into his warm embrace and gives her the comfort after she heard the devastating news. She tells him she isn't getting married to Fred because she doesn't love him enough. She doesn't expect him to say or do anything, but he does. After this revelation, they share an intimate moment, embarking on the new journey that / lies ahead of them. Joe writes Laurie a letter explaining how she misses him and regrets her decision. She hurt him, and that's the worst mistake she has ever made. She remembers vividly the day when she left everything and went to New York. Joe hides the letter in the mailbox, the keys of which Laurie gave to every sister. Laurie is here and wakes Joe from her sleep. As soon as she sees him, she is over the moon and hugs him. He is worried that she might hate him for what happened, but she doesn't. Instead, she is the happiest she has been in a while. He brings along all the happiest memories of the past. Amy is at Beth's grave and wouldn't come home straight away. She asks if Amy nagged her throughout the way, and he replies that she has, but he likes /sit that way. That's when he discloses that he and Amy are married. It comes as a surprise for her. After all she has suffered, she never thought she'll feel the pain again, but here she is, going through the same emotions that Lori went through when she rejected him. He now realizes that Joe's decision was actually right. They were never meant to be together, and Amy was the one destiny had written for him. He tells Joe that he has always loved her, but what he feels for Amy is different. After their marriage, the bond has only grown stronger. Joe tells him he deserves the love he has. He asks if they can still be friends, and she skillfully masks all her pain and smiles /brighter than she has in weeks. They come down, and Amy has arrived. Joe watches from behind as everyone meets each other and looks at her sister, Amy. She swallows all the hurt and walks forward. Amy looks at Joe and waits for a reaction. She is worried that her sister may hate her for marrying the guy who used to love her. She is anxious as she explains. She wanted to tell her, but couldn't as everything happened so fast, and before she knew they were married. Joe looks at her sister struggling and quickly welcomes her into her loving embrace. She comforts her. Joe isn't mad anymore. She is happy for her sister and will sacrifice for her family. She has learned from her mother how to be a better woman. Amy is relieved and thanks Joe for being so understanding. They both grieve for their sister together. Joe quickly runs to the mailbox and takes out the letter she had written for him. She tears it and throws into the river. On her way back, she meets Mr. Lawrence. He is grieving the loss of Beth in the same way as the rest of the family is. To him, it feels like he has lost his daughter twice. Joe knows this as he cared for the Beth more than anyone. She knows she isn't half as good as her sister, but promises to be a friend who'll always be there when you need them. He is too scared to go in as her absence pains him, but Joe gently grabs his hand and leads /Shim into the house. At night, Joe lies wide awake. Beth's absence feels too heavy for her. She looks towards her bed, which is now empty. Joe takes all her novels and burns them one by one. She burns everything but leaves one, the where she wrote for Beth. Joe takes it to the piano that Mr. Lawrence had gifted Beth and lights up the candle. She opens the notebook and begins writing. She spends her days and nights up in the attic where she continues to write. Candles burn, days turn into night, but she keeps writing. The floors are covered with pages as she sets them in order. After all the hard work, she sends the first few chapters to Mr. Dashwood. This time, the plot is different. It's not about battle or a thriller, but rather something pleasant and well-crafted. She doesn't anticipate much, but she sends it anyhow. Aunt March has died, leaving a large home in Joe's name. Joe, Meg, and Amy go around the home, unsure of what to do. Joe establishes a school here. They never received the education they deserved as youngsters, but she intends to change that. She aspires to deliver high-quality education to all students, regardless of gender or socioeconomic circumstances. Meg's children are also welcome to attend her school. When her sisters inquire about her writing, Joe is at a loss for words. She doesn't believe many people will be interested in the narrative she recently wrote. Furthermore, she is no longer confident in her writing. Her sisters, on the other hand, support her. They've always been her strongest supporters and have always enjoyed what she writes. Amy is not convinced. She believes that people don't read such tales since there aren't many of them published. Joe stares at Amy, pleased of her sister for maturing and becoming intelligent. They fight and laugh hysterically. Mr. Dashwood reads her chapters, and although he acknowledges that most people would not find it innovative, he still requests that she give him additional tales. When her mother phones, she has just finished reading the letter. She rushes downstairs and walks directly to the table for supper, without saying anything. She stuffs her lips as her mother informs her that someone wants to see her. As Joe continues to eat, Friedrich stands uncomfortably in the background. Finally, he says something, and she knows the voice. Joe looks around and notices him standing there. Her face is adorned with the most beautiful grin she has ever seen. Joe recalls the moment she saw him for the first time. She had just arrived in New York and met him on the boarding house stairs. He was captivated by her at first sight and has been ever since. Joe asks what he's doing here, and he tells her uncomfortably that he was passing by and thought about paying her a visit. All of the family members emerge when he tells this story. He wasn't expecting so many people and attempts to leave, but Amy convinces him to remain. Lori has no idea who this guy is and continues to question everyone. He introduces himself, and Joe mentions that they used to work at the same boarding home. Hannah expresses exactly what everyone is thinking. He is incredibly attractive. They greet him like they have always done. Her parents inquire if he intends to remain in New York, but he has other ideas. He has been given a professorship in California and is considering going there since he has nothing to do here. Joe can't help but feel depressed when she hears this. She wants he will remain. The family sits around, talking and gossiping amongst themselves. Friedrich observes them calmly, sometimes smiling. He observes the piano and wonders which of them is the pianist. As soon as he raises the question, a weird sadness pervades the room. They tell him it belongs to their sister. They all play a little bit, but none as well as she does. He expresses his sympathy for the death of their beloved sister. Their father inquires whether he plays the piano, which he does. He is cautious at first, but as everyone encourages him, he begins to play. Tears well up in their eyes as old music fills their home once again. As everyone bids him goodbye, he is departing. He stares Jo in the eyes one more time and invites her to see him if she ever comes to California. She has no plans to go, but she appreciates his kind offer. He waves farewell and walks away. Jo shuts the door and turns around to discover her family standing there, quietly observing her. When she inquires as to what is wrong, her father speaks out. He believes Friedrich will be a nice buddy, but Amy makes it apparent that he is just here for Jo. Jo mocks his family for making assumptions, yet they are correct. He was just here for Jo. She shined and smiled the whole time he was here, and her family noticed. Amy is determined to stop him before he boards the train and requests that Laurie ready the carriage. Laurie had never expected to be preparing a carriage so Jo might pursue another man, yet here he is, doing what his wife had requested him to do. Jo claims that he is relocating to California, but everyone knows it is a lie and that he is not leaving. She attempts to make more excuses, but no one is listening, so she gets ready. Amy and Meg cheer her on as the carriage comes to a halt and she rushes in the rain towards the railway station. Mr. Dashwood is at home when he notices his children approaching. They had obtained Little Women and anxiously beg him if he has any additional chapters. He is taken aback by the younger audience's attention. Mr. Dashwood approaches Jo and asks her about the finale. In her works, the main character marries no one. He is opposed to this since people like reading novels with nice endings. So she informs him. Friedrich was already waiting for Jo when she arrived. They are standing beneath an umbrella while the rain pours down. She begs him not to go, and he agrees. Mr. Dashwood offers her 5% royalty rates and attempts to get the copyright, but she refuses. It's her narrative, her book. She is the only owner of it. As a result, Mr. Dashwood has no option but to accept her demands, and the sale is finalized. Jo has opened the school like she desired. Friedrich teaches music, Meg instructs in acting, and Amy paints with youngsters. Everyone comes around the cake that the family has brought for their mother. Jo happily holds the first edition of Little Women in her hands for the first time.